The storm owned the night. Snow drove sideways across the narrow highway, erasing the world beyond the headlights as Officer Eliza Brennan gripped the wheel with both hands. At 33, Elle had learned to read Alaska's moods the way some people read faces, and tonight the land was angry. Wind screamed off the frozen inlet, battering her patrol with fists of ice while darkness pressed against the windows like something alive and hungry. She drove alone because that was how she preferred it. Alone meant no questions about the black evidence pouch on the passenger seat, no curious eyes watching when she checked the rearview mirror for the fourth time in as many minutes. The pouch sat quiet and patient, but Elle felt its weight like a stone in her chest. Inside was a
That's the
USB
target,
drive
Captain. No
wrapped
movement
in
yet.
waterproof
Copy that.
plastic,
Rex is alert.
and
Ready
on
to
that
deploy.
drive were
Steady,
photographs
confirming
that would
approach.
end careers, destroy reputations, and quite possibly get her killed. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47. Each minute ticked louder than it should have, counting down to something Elle couldn't name, but felt approaching like the storm itself. 4 months ago, she had started noticing patterns. Women went missing from Juneau's smaller docks, the ones where fishing boats unloaded their catch and no one asked too many questions. The official reports called them runaways, drifters, prostitutes, making bad choices. But Elle had looked into their eyes in the photographs, had read the fear written in the way their hands were positioned in the last confirmed sightings, and she knew better. These women hadn't run. They'd been taken. The breakthrough came 3 weeks ago when a shipping manifest crossed her desk by accident, misfiled in a domestic dispute case. Medical Transport Services, it said. Clean, professional, completely wrong. Elle had spent 72 hours tracing that company through layers of shell corporations and false addresses until she found what lay beneath the paperwork. Routes that made no sense. Payments that came from accounts registered to people who didn't exist. And cargo manifests that listed medical supplies but showed weights and dimensions for something else entirely. Something human. She had photographed everything. Documents spread across her apartment floor in the dead of night, her body camera recording each page while her hands shook and her mind screamed at her to stop, to walk away, to let someone else carry this weight. But Elle had never learned how to walk away from the truth, not since the day her mother vanished when she was 16. Margaret Brennan had disappeared on a Tuesday in October. Told Elle she had errands to run, kissed her daughter's forehead, and drove away in the old Volvo they'd bought together. She never came home. Police searched for 6 weeks before quietly filing the case away. Probable runaway, they said. Marital problems, they suggested, though Elle's father had been dead for 3 years. The silence that followed was the kind that calcified in your bones, that taught you how little the world cared about one missing woman. Elle had joined the police academy 11 months later. If no one else would look for answers, she would become the person who did. Now, 17 years later, she finally understood what had happened to her mother. The realization had come tonight 2 hours ago, when she'd gone through the USB files one final time, before driving to Anchorage to hand them over to the FBI field office. She had scrolled through victim photographs, matching faces to names in missing person reports when she saw it. A woman's wrist in the corner of a shipping container photo. Just a wrist, the rest of her body out of frame. But on that wrist was a scar, a distinctive C shape from a childhood burn. Elle knew that scar. She had traced it with her fingers 1,000 times as a girl asking her mother how it happened. A kitchen accident, Margaret had said. Hot oil and bad timing. Elle had stared at that photograph until her vision blurred and her hands went numb. Her mother hadn't run away. She'd been taken by the same network that was operating right now tonight, shipping women like cargo to places Elle didn't want to imagine. The rage that filled her then was clean and cold, and absolutely pure. She had copied everything, backed it up 3 times, sealed the USB in the waterproof pouch, and started driving. Anchorage was 4 hours north. The FBI office opened at 8. She would make it with time to spare, and then she would watch this entire operation burn. Except the radio had died 30 minutes ago. Static, then nothing. And her phone showed no signal, which shouldn't have been possible this close to town. Elle had driven these roads for 7 years. She knew where the dead zones were, and this wasn't one of them. The headlights in her rearview mirror appeared like a judgment. They stayed back, patient and steady, matching her speed through each curve. Elle told herself it was nothing. Just another driver heading north through the storm. But her hands tightened on the wheel and her pulse kicked up, and somewhere deep in the place where instinct lived, she knew. She knew who was following her and why and how this was going to end. Detective Randall Pierce had been her training officer, her mentor, the man who taught her how to read crime scenes and write reports that actually mattered. He was 47 years old with a square jaw, close-cropped gray beard, and eyes that never quite looked at what they seemed to be watching. 20 years on the force, 3 commendations for bravery, a wife and 2 teenage sons. He coached Little League on weekends and knew everyone's name at the station. He had pulled Elle out of a burning warehouse 4 years ago, a bullet grazing his shoulder as he shoved her through the door. Trust had come easy after that. Too easy. Elle watched the headlights grow closer in the mirror and made a decision. If Pierce wanted to talk, they would talk in the open where she could see his hands. She flicked on her turn signal and eased toward a narrow turnout half buried in fresh snow. The patrol car rolled to a stop and Elle stepped out into the wind. Cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing breath and numbing her cheeks in seconds. She kept her hands visible but loose, her posture relaxed but ready, and waited. Pierce's unmarked sedan pulled in behind her, engine idling. He took his time getting out, and when he did, his movements were calm and unhurried. His coat was zipped high against the storm, his hands empty, his face showing nothing but mild concern. "Brennan," he called over the wind, voice warm and practiced. "What are you doing out here alone in this mess?" Elle kept 6 feet between them. "Same as you, detective. Working late." His eyes flicked to her patrol car, then back. "Radio check came through an hour ago. You didn't respond." "Storm killed it," Elle said. Her hand drifted toward her belt, casual, but Pierce saw. He always saw. "You didn't answer your cell either." He took a step closer. Not threatening, just conversational. "People were worried." "I'm fine." Elle's voice came out harder than she intended. "Heading back to the station now." Pierce smiled, the kind that used to put rookies at ease. "You look exhausted. Let me follow you in, make sure you get there safe." The wind howled between them, carrying the sharp scent of salt and ice. Elle studied his face and saw the truth written in the microscopic tension around his eyes, the way his weight was balanced forward on his toes, the careful positioning of his hands. He knew. Somehow he knew what was in the evidence pouch, and he was here to make sure it never reached Anchorage. "You followed me," Elle said, not a question. Pierce's smile faded just slightly. "You've been digging where you shouldn't dig, Elle." People notice. "What people?" "The ones who pay better than the department does." His voice held no apology, just simple fact. "You found something you weren't supposed to find." Elle's pulse hammered in her ears, but her voice stayed level. "The USB in my car. That's what you want." "Smart girl." Pierce took another step. "Give it to me and we can forget this happened. You go home, file your report about a broken radio, and tomorrow we're back to normal." "And the women in those containers?" Elle asked. "We forget about them too." Something flickered across Pierce's face. Not quite guilt, but its distant cousin. "You can't save them, Elle. This is bigger than both of us. The machine's already moving. And all you can do is choose whether you get crushed under it or step aside." Elle thought about her mother's wrist, that C-shaped scar captured in pixels and metadata. She thought about the 11 other women in those files, someone's daughters and sisters and mothers. She thought about the 17 years of silence she'd carried, the question that had shaped every choice she'd made since she was 16. "No," she said quietly. Pierce sighed like a man who'd expected disappointment but hoped otherwise. "I'm sorry, Elle, I really am." He moved fast. The first blow came from the side, knocking the air from her lungs before she could react. Elle stumbled snow, swallowing her knees as pain exploded across her ribs. She reached for her weapon, but Pierce was already there, kicking it away with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this before. His boot sent the gun spinning across ice into darkness. Elle tried to rise. Pierce grabbed her arm and twisted, professional and almost gentle, forcing her down. His other hand drove into her kidney, precise and devastating. She gasped, vision sparking white and tasted copper on her tongue. "I told them you'd stop," Pierce said quietly as he hauled her upright. "I told them you'd see reason. But you're like your mother, too stubborn to know when you've lost." The words hit harder than his fists. Elle's head snapped up, blood warming her split lip. "You knew her." Pierce's eyes were flat as frozen glass. "I was young, needed money. They offered $200,000 to make one woman disappear." He shoved Elle toward her patrol car, his grip iron on her arm. Margaret Brennan was DEA, working undercover on the trafficking network. Smart woman. She figured it out too late. "You killed her." Elle's voice cracked on the words. "I put her on a boat. What happened after wasn't my problem." Pierce yanked open the driver's door and forced Elle inside, snapping her cuffs around the steering wheel with practiced efficiency. "You should have stayed out of it. Should have learned that some truths are better left buried." Elle struggled, metal biting deep into her wrists. "They'll find me. They'll know it was you." Pierce leaned close, his breath fogging between them. No one's going to find you, Elle. Storm's getting worse. Roads are a mess. Tragic accident, officer slides off the road into the inlet. By the time they search, there won't be anything left but a patrol car under the ice. He slammed the door shut. Elle screamed his name as the car rocked violently. Once. Twice. Then the tires lost their grip and physics took over. The patrol car slid toward the edge of Eagle Pass, where road became cliff and cliff became frozen water 40 feet below. Time stretched thin. Elle saw Pierce's face through the window, expressionless and already turning away. She saw the guardrail buckle and snap. She saw darkness rushing up like an open-mouthed patient and inevitable. Then the car tipped and fell, and the world became noise and motion and the terrible certainty of dying alone. Metal shrieked as the patrol car struck the slope and rolled. Once the roof crumpling, twice the windshield spiderwebbing. It landed roof first in the frozen shallows with a crunch that Elle felt in her bones. The impact knocked consciousness sideways, turning thought into fragments and pain into white noise. When awareness returned, she was hanging upside down, wrists cuffed to the wheel, blood pooling in her head. Water was coming in, not rushing but patient and methodical, seeping through the cracked windshield and bent door seams. Black and merciless, it claimed territory inch by cold inch. The single headlight that hadn't died flickered like a tired eye, throwing broken shadows across the cabin. Elle tried to pull herself up by instinct. The cuffs bit deep steel teeth, cutting sensation from her hands until her fingers went numb. Panic surged bright, an animal screaming at her to move, to fight, to do something. She forced it down with every technique she'd learned, every breathing exercise and mental discipline, because panic made mistakes loud and calm made them useful. Think, she told herself, voice barely a whisper. Think before the cold steals it. She kicked at the door. Once, twice, putting everything she had into it. The water pushed back, harder pressure building as the car settled into frozen mud. Something groaned, a long metal complaint, and the vehicle shifted slightly. Ice cracked overhead with sounds like distant gunfire. Elle stopped kicking. Movement would only make it sink faster. She had maybe 5 minutes before the water reached her face, maybe 3 before the cold shut down her core functions. After that, hypothermia would tell her to sleep, and she would listen, because the human body could only fight so long. She closed her eyes and saw her father. Tall and spare in his old sheriff's coat, gray hair combed straight back, hands steady even when the world wasn't. He taught her to ice skate on a lake that looked just like this one had fallen once, and laughed, then turned serious as he pulled her up. Cold lies, Elle, he'd said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. It tells you to sleep, tells you everything will be better if you just rest. Don't listen. His voice felt close now, close as breath and twice as real. The water climbed past her shoulders. Her parka grew heavy, dragging at her neck like hands pulling her down. Each breath felt thinner than the last, as if someone else was measuring out her air and keeping the rest for themselves. She tried to count, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, but numbers slipped away like water through a sieve. The headlight stuttered and died, plunging her into absolute darkness. In the dark, the cold felt louder. It roared. Elle's thoughts scattered. She saw the women from the files, faces she'd memorized during long nights alone. She saw her mother's wrist with its C-shaped scar. She saw the manifest with its clean professional lies, and the shipping containers where human beings became cargo. She had promised herself she would get the evidence back to people who could act on it, who couldn't pretend not to see what was happening in the shadows of their jurisdiction. The USB drive was still in her jacket pocket, hard and small as a coin pressing against her ribs. She curled around it instinctively, as if her body understood it mattered, even when her mind was fragmenting. Her breath hitched. The edges of her vision sparkled white even though there was nothing to see. Sleep pulled at her like tide, warm and inviting, in a way that absolutely terrified her, because she knew what it meant. She opened her mouth to shout, to pray, to curse, but only bubbles escaped, racing upward to burst against glass that no one would ever see through again. The car groaned. A deeper crack split the ice overhead. For one wild moment, Elle imagined the entire inlet giving way, swallowing her and the patrol car together, erasing the story before it could be told. Her mother's face floated in the darkness behind her eyes, young and smiling, the way Elle remembered her before the vanishing. "I'm sorry," Elle whispered to that memory. "I tried." Then something cut through the wind and the water and the terrible silence of drowning. A sound. Not the groan of ice or the howl of storm, but something sharp and alive, close enough to be real. A bark, low, urgent, carrying an insistence that did not belong to weather. Elle's eyes flew open in the darkness. She listened past her own pulse, past the water lapping at her chin. The sound came again clearer now, not echoing like ice settling, but anchored, purposeful. A dog. The thought felt absurd and miraculous at once. Out here, miles from anything in a blizzard that was trying to erase the world, but the bark answered her doubt closer, joined by the crunch of something moving through snow above her. Something testing the ice, shifting weight carefully. A beam of light sliced through the water for just a second, jittering as it passed over the submerged roof. Elle's pulse leapt painfully. She tried to lift her head and blackness surged thick and fast. The cold had wrapped her thoughts in wool, stolen the number she'd been counting, left her with nothing but sensation and the most basic animal drive to survive. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely remember her own name. But somewhere in the part of her that refused to quit, she held on to the sound of that bark the way a drowning person holds on to driftwood. Her grip on consciousness slipped. The darkness softened at the edges, becoming almost gentle. Elle let her head fall back, cheek resting against glass colder than anything should be, and thought maybe this was how it ended. Not with answers or justice or resolution, but with a dog barking in a storm and a stranger's light sweeping across water that would soon be her grave. At least someone had seen. At least she wouldn't vanish without a trace the way her mother had. The cold claimed the last edges of her awareness. The bark continued somewhere above, insistent and refusing to fade, and then there was nothing at all. Miles away in a hunting cabin tucked into spruce and stone, Lieutenant Wyatt Callahan woke to a sound that shouldn't exist. He was on his feet before thought caught up with instinct, reaching for the pistol on the nightstand in one smooth motion. The cabin was dark except for embers in the wood stove, casting everything in shades of orange and shadow. Wind hammered the walls, but that wasn't what had pulled him from sleep. Stryker stood at the door, body rigid, one paw raised. The German shepherd's ears were pricked forward, every line of him screaming alert. He turned his amber eyes toward Wyatt and made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl. A warning. Wyatt had learned to trust that sound 2 years ago when Stryker saved his life in a firefight he preferred not to remember. The dog had been a police working dog, then 3 tours under his collar before an IED ended his career early. Now he was retired, living out his days in Alaska with a man who understood what it meant to carry scars that didn't show. "What is it, boy?" Wyatt asked, voice rough with sleep. Stryker barked once, sharp and commanding. Then he scratched at the door hard enough to leave marks. Wyatt pulled on boots and a heavy parka, grabbed the flashlight and his rifle, and stepped out into the storm. Wind hit him like a fist, stealing breath and numbing exposed skin. Snow drove sideways through the beam of his flashlight, turning the world into static. Stryker didn't wait. He plunged forward into the drifts, nose low, moving with the certainty of a compass needle that never wavered. Wyatt followed, trusting the dog more than his own senses in weather that wanted to kill them both. They descended through forest where pine pressed close and snow gathered in patient drifts. Stryker angled toward the inlet, toward the place where land met frozen water, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees just from proximity. Wyatt's lungs burned, his face went numb. But Stryker kept moving, pausing only to make sure his human followed. They reached the edge of the slope where Eagle Pass overlooked the harbor. Stryker stopped so suddenly that Wyatt nearly collided with him. The dog's body went rigid again, tail low, and he barked. Not at the storm, at something below. Wyatt swept his flashlight across the ice. The beam caught on twisted metal just below the waterline. Dark shape, wrong angles. A vehicle roof down, half submerged in the frozen shallows. A patrol car. "Christ," Wyatt breathed. He slid down the embankment on his back boots, digging in to control the descent. Stryker followed, more graceful despite the terrain. They landed hard on the ice beside the wreck, and Wyatt's light found the window. A face pressed against glass. Pale, motionless, auburn hair floating like rust-colored seaweed. A woman. Training took over the part of Wyatt that had been quiet but never gone. He assessed the scene in seconds. Door crumpled, water rising, no bubbles near her mouth. Either unconscious or worse. Maybe 2 minutes before the cabin flooded completely. He yanked the rescue axe from his belt and wedged the blade into the doorframe. Metal protested. The ice beneath him groaned a warning. Wyatt ignored it, putting his weight behind the leverage, and the door gave an inch. Water surged through the gap, black and vicious. Stryker barked urgent, as if trying to tell him to hurry. Wyatt shoved his arm through the opening fingers, numbing instantly in water cold enough to stop hearts. He fumbled for the seatbelt, found it, cut it free with his knife. The woman's body sagged. He caught her under the shoulders, hauling her toward the gap as the vehicle settled deeper, with a groan that sounded too much like surrender. The cuffs snagged on something. Wyatt swore, reached back in with his other hand, and pulled with everything he had. Metal snapped. The cuffs came free, still locked around her wrists, and Wyatt dragged her out onto the ice. Stryker was there immediately, pressing his body along her side, sharing heat the way police working dogs were trained to do. Wyatt checked for a pulse, fingers clumsy against her throat. There. Faint and irregular, but there. Her lips were blue skin, waxy pale eyes moving beneath closed lids. Hypothermia, stage 2, maybe edging toward 3. 5 minutes ago, and he would have been pulling a corpse from the water. 5 minutes later, and he'd be doing the same. Wyatt gathered her into his arms and started climbing. Stryker led the way, finding purchase where there shouldn't be any pausing to look back, as if to say hurry. The storm tried to erase them. The cold bit deeper with every step. But Wyatt had carried wounded men through worse, had learned how to move when the body said stop, and he climbed. The cabin appeared through the snow like a promise kept. Wyatt shouldered through the door and laid the woman near the wood stove. Stryker circled once, then lay down beside her body, pressed close. Wyatt's hands moved with the precision of long practice. Stripped the wet clothes. Dry blankets. No direct heat, not yet, that would shock the system. Warm packs under the arms along the sides. He rubbed her limbs carefully, bringing circulation back without forcing it. Her pulse stuttered, steadied slightly, stuttered again. "Come on," he said, voice low and steady. "Stay with me." Her chest hitched. Once. Twice. Then her breathing found a rhythm, shallow but consistent. Wyatt monitored it, watching for the signs he'd learned in field medicine courses and hard experience. Pulse climbing slowly toward normal. Skin color improving from wax to merely pale. Shivering starting, which was good, meant her body was trying to warm itself. He built up the fire, fed it until heat filled the small space, then sat back and really looked at her for the first time. Mid-30s, lean and strong despite the ordeal, with high cheekbones and a face that would have been striking if it wasn't slack with exhaustion. Her wrists were bruised where the cuffs had been, her lips split and swollen. Someone had beaten her before putting her in that car, and someone had pushed that car off the road, hoping the ice would hide what they'd done. Wyatt had left civilization because he was tired of violence, tired of the choices that left good people dead and bad people thriving. He'd come to Alaska for silence and space, for a place where the only thing that could hurt him was weather, honest and impartial. But looking at this woman who'd been left to drown, cuffed to her own steering wheel, like evidence that needed erasing, he felt something old and familiar wake up in his chest. Purpose. Sharp and clear as a knife blade. Stryker lifted his head, amber eyes meeting Wyatt's. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and deliberate. A question and an answer at the same time. "Yeah," Wyatt said quietly. "I know." Outside, the storm reached its peak. Wind screamed against the cabin walls. Snow piled higher against windows that glowed orange from the fire within. And in that small, warm space, a woman who should have died began the long, slow work of surviving. The fire had burned low by the time dawn broke, embers glowing like secrets in ash. Wyatt had kept watch through the night, monitoring Elle's vitals and feeding wood to the stove at intervals. Now, with pale light filtering through frost-covered windows, he allowed himself the luxury of hot coffee while Elle slept on. Stryker lifted his head as Elle stirred, tail thumping, once against the floor in greeting. She woke differently this time. No panic, no confusion. Just the slow return of consciousness that came when the body remembered it was safe. She pushed herself up with a wince that told Wyatt her ribs were worse than he'd thought. She took inventory methodically, cop habits asserting themselves even through pain and confusion. Strange cabin, strange man, dog she didn't recognize. Her hand went to her hip where her service weapon should have been found. Nothing, and the fear that flickered across her face was raw and real. "Who are you?" Her voice came out, rough, scraped raw by cold water, and screaming no one had heard. "Lieutenant Wyatt Callahan, retired." He stayed seated, hands visible on the table. "That's Stryker, also retired. We pulled you out of the inlet last night." Elle's gaze moved to Stryker, who lifted his head and regarded her with the calm intelligence of a working dog assessing a situation. Something in her posture loosened fractionally. "You saved my life." "Stryker found you. I just did the heavy lifting." She looked down at herself, at the dry clothes that weren't hers, the bandages on her wrists, and understanding dawned with a flush that had nothing to do with the fire. "You undressed me." "Hypothermia doesn't care about modesty," Wyatt said simply. "Your core temperature was 89 degrees. Another 10 minutes and I would have been calling the coroner instead of making coffee." Elle absorbed this, then nodded once. Professional courtesy between people who understood triage. She tested her weight, stood carefully, and swayed. Wyatt was there in 2 steps, steadying her with a hand under her elbow. She pulled away gently but firmly. "I'm fine." "You're not," Wyatt said. "But I respect the lie." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across her split lip. She looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishing, the military precision of the organization, the rifle prop near the door. "You live here." "Borrowed it from a friend who doesn't ask questions." Wyatt moved to the stove, poured coffee into a metal cup, and handed it to her. "Drink, small sips." Elle obeyed, warming her hands on the cup, and some of the tension bled out of her shoulders. She looked at Stryker, who had risen and moved to sit beside Wyatt, and asked the question that mattered. "Why were you out there in that storm at that hour?" "Wasn't planning to be. Stryker woke me up, insisted we go looking." Wyatt reached down to scratch behind the dog's scarred ear. "He's got instincts I learned to trust a long time ago." "He's beautiful," Elle said and meant it. "What is he, 6'7", 3 tours as a police working dog before an explosion ended his career early." Wyatt's voice carried the weight of shared experience. "We both came up here to figure out what comes after." Elle studied them both, the man and the bomb, and saw something that made her shoulders drop another fraction. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that some wounds don't show, but never fully heal. She set the coffee down and looked Wyatt straight in the eye. "Someone tried to kill me last night. Someone I trusted. He's going to come looking when he realizes I'm not dead." "I know," Wyatt said. "I saw the cuffs, saw the way that car went in. That wasn't an accident. It was my mentor, Detective Randall Pierce, 20 years on the force." Her voice stayed level, but fury burned underneath like coals. "He beat me, cuffed me to my steering wheel, and pushed my patrol car off Eagle Pass because I found evidence of a trafficking operation running through Juneau's ports." Wyatt went very still, the kind of stillness that came before violence or revelation, and sometimes both. "Trafficking. 11 women missing over 8 months. Shipping manifests that don't match cargo weights. Money moving through accounts registered to people who don't exist." Elle's hands curled into fists. "I spent 4 months building a case. Photographed everything, copied files, got it all on a USB drive. Pierce found out somehow. Last night he followed me on the highway, pulled me over and told me I dug too deep." "Where's the USB now?" Elle's hand went to her jacket pocket, then stopped. Her eyes widened. "My jacket, my gear, where?" "In the corner drying." Wyatt gestured to where her clothes hung near the stove. "Everything you had on you is there." Elle moved fast despite the pain crossing the cabin to dig through her jacket pockets. Her hands found the waterproof pouch still sealed, and relief washed over her face so completely it hurt to watch. She held it like scripture, like the only thing in the world that mattered. "This is everything," she said quietly. "Photos manifest communications logs. Enough to end careers and put people in prison for decades." She looked at Wyatt, "Including Pierce. And when he realizes you survived, he'll come looking for that drive." "He will." Elle's jaw set. "But he won't get it. I've already lost too much to this network." Something in her voice made Wyatt ask, "Personal?" Elle was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened the pouch, pulled out the USB drive, and plugged it into her phone. She scrolled through files until she found what she was looking for and held the screen out to Wyatt. "4 months ago, I was building a case. Tonight, I realized I've been looking for this network for 17 years. The photograph showed a shipping container interior, dim and industrial. Women huddled in frame, faces turned away. But in the corner, visible only because Elle knew to look for it, was a woman's wrist. And on that wrist was a scar, C-shaped and distinctive. "My mother," Elle said. "Margaret Brennan. She disappeared when I was 16. Police called it a runaway case, filed it away, moved on. I became a cop because I couldn't let it go." Her voice cracked slightly. "Last night, Pierce told me the truth. My mother was DEA working undercover on this trafficking network. He was young, needed money, and someone paid him $200,000 to put her on a boat. He was the last person to see her alive." Wyatt looked at the photograph, at Elle's face, and felt something shift in his chest. The same sick recognition that came when you realized the enemy wasn't some distant abstraction, but something wearing a familiar face, smiling while it destroyed everything you loved. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with every fiber. Elle nodded, accepting the sympathy without dwelling on it. "I need to get this to the FBI. Pierce has connections in local departments, but federal agents in Anchorage should be clean. If I can reach them." "You won't make it," Wyatt interrupted gently. Your car's under 40 feet of water. Roads are snowed in, and Pierce knows roughly where you went off the cliff. He'll be searching. Then I walk. I've done worse. Not with bruised ribs and hypothermia recovery. You'd make it maybe 5 miles before your body quit. Wyatt crossed his arms. And even if you did reach Anchorage, how do you know who to trust? If Pierce is dirty, how many others are on the payroll? Elle opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. The logic was sound and she knew it. Frustration warred with pragmatism across her face. So what do you suggest? We verify what you've got, find out how deep this goes, then we figure out who's clean enough to hand it to. Wyatt moved to the window, scanning the tree line out of habit. But first we need to know what Pierce is doing, whether he's looking for you, and how much time we have. Elle studied him, this stranger who'd pulled her from death and was now offering to step into her war. Why, this isn't your fight. You don't owe me anything. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, edges worn from handling. A young man in military fatigues grinning at the camera, arms slung around Wyatt's shoulders. Brothers in everything but blood. Sergeant Cole Hardin, my teammate, best friend, died in my arms 2 years ago in Afghanistan. Wyatt's voice was carefully neutral. Before he died, he told me his sister Samantha had been taken. Said it happened in Alaska. Said something about ports and cargo. I thought it was delirium. Combat stress making him see connections that weren't there. I didn't believe him. He looked at Elle. Show me the rest of those files. Elle pulled up the victim database, scrolled through faces and names. Wyatt scanned them with the focused intensity of someone looking for ghosts. When he saw her, he stopped breathing for 3 seconds. Samantha Hardin, 24 years old, last seen at a Juneau dock 6 months before Cole died. Blonde hair, blue eyes, Cole's smile. Listed as a potential runaway by local police. Never investigated further. She's in there, Wyatt said, voice rough. Cole tried to tell me, and I didn't listen. I let him die, thinking I didn't believe him. Elle put a hand on his arm, brief and firm. He knew you loved him. That's what matters. What matters is making this right. Wyatt looked at Stryker, who had been watching the exchange with patient attention. We find out how big this network is. We get your evidence to people who will act on it, and we make sure every person involved answers for what they did. Elle searched his face and found no hesitation, no doubt. Just the clear-eyed determination of someone who'd made a decision and would see it through to the end. She extended her hand. Partners, then. Wyatt shook it. Partners. Stryker barked once, sharp and approving, and both humans smiled despite everything. The planning took an hour. Wyatt had maps of the region detailed and annotated from his time scouting hunting routes. Elle traced the locations she'd identified in her investigation, marking ports and warehouses with a pencil. Patterns emerged. A compound northeast of the inlet listed as a fish processing facility, but showing activity at odd hours. Supply routes that made no sense unless you were trying to avoid main roads. And a shipment scheduled for Wednesday night, 2 days away, that every communication in Pierce's files referenced with unusual urgency. That's the one, Elle said, tapping the date. Whatever they're moving, it's big enough that Pierce was willing to kill a cop to protect it. So we recon the compound, as Wyatt said. See what we're dealing with. Get photo evidence to back up your files. Then we find someone in federal law enforcement clean enough to trust. Agent Victoria Hayes, Elle said suddenly. FBI. She worked my mother's disappearance 17 years ago, pushed for a real investigation. Got shut down by local pressure and transferred to Anchorage. If anyone's clean, it's her. Wyatt nodded. Then she's our endgame. But first we need to know what Pierce is doing right now. As if summoned by the words, Stryker's head snapped toward the door. His ears pricked forward, body going rigid in the alert posture that meant threat incoming. A low growl built in his chest, not loud, but absolute in its warning. Wyatt was moving before thought, grabbing the rifle and killing the fire in one smooth motion. Elle crossed to the window, pressing herself against the wall, and peered through a gap in the curtains. 3 vehicles crawling up the access road. 2 SUVs and Pierce's unmarked sedan moving slowly through snowdrifts. Searching. How did they find us? Elle breathed. Wyatt's mind raced, then locked on the answer. Your badge. Show me your badge. Elle pulled it from her jacket pocket. Wyatt examined it closely, ran his fingers along the edges, and found what he was looking for. A small GPS tracker, no bigger than a button, embedded in the badge clip. Sophisticated, expensive. The kind of equipment that suggested serious money behind the operation. They've been tracking you, Wyatt said. Probably since you started investigating. Pierce knew exactly where you were heading last night. Elle stared at the tracker, fury and violation warring on her face. Then her expression hardened into something cold and tactical. We use it, lead them away from here, make them think I'm running north. Buy ourselves time. That's a lot of forest between here and the compound, Wyatt said, and they'll have weapons numbers and no hesitation about using both. Then we even the odds. Elle checked her phone calculating distances. There's an old mining station 3 miles northeast, abandoned but still standing. We hole up there, make them come to us on our terms. When they commit forces to that location, we double back and hit the compound while it's understaffed. Wyatt studied the map, running scenarios. Tactically sound if brutal. They'd be trading defensive position for information gambling that Pierce would take the bait. And if they burn us out or wait us out, then we adapt. We're both good at that. It wasn't a perfect plan. But perfect didn't exist in the field, only good enough to survive and better than what the enemy expected. Wyatt looked at Stryker, who had stopped growling, but remained alert, waiting for commands. What do you think, boy? One more mission. Stryker's tail moved once. Not a wag exactly. An acknowledgement. All right, Wyatt said. He moved fast, gathering essential gear. Rope, medical kit, ammunition, water, energy bars. No tent. They'd moved too fast for that. He strapped on his tactical vest, loaded magazines with the muscle memory of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and slung the rifle across his back. Elle did the same with what gear remained from her patrol kit, moving through pain with the grim determination of someone who'd learned to function hurt. She caught Wyatt watching and gave him a tight smile. I've worked through worse. I don't doubt it. They slipped out the back as the vehicles rolled closer, using the cabin to screen their movement. Stryker led the way, nose low, reading wind and terrain in ways no human could match. Snow had drifted deep overnight, making each step work. But it also meant their tracks would be visible. That was intentional. Pierce needed to follow. Elle attached the badge tracker to her belt, clearly visible in her prints, a breadcrumb trail for wolves. They moved in silence, communicating through hand signals when necessary. Wyatt set the pace fast enough to build distance, but sustainable for Elle's condition. Every 15 minutes, he called a halt, checking her color and breathing, making sure the cold and exertion weren't pushing her body past its limits. She never complained, just drank water when he offered it and kept moving. 2 hours in, Stryker stopped suddenly. His ears went flat, body low, and he looked back at Wyatt with an expression that needed no translation. Company. Wyatt held up a fist. Elle dropped into cover behind a fallen log, weapon drawn. They waited, breathing quiet, while sound carried through winter silence. Engines, multiple vehicles, voices calling to each other, too far away to make out words but close enough to feel like pressure. They found the cabin, Elle whispered, faster than I expected. Military gear, Wyatt replied. Thermal imaging, maybe, or just good tracking. He scanned their surroundings, calculating options. We need to move. Mining station is still 90 minutes out. They pushed harder. The forest grew denser, pine branches, heavy with snow, reaching down like hands trying to slow them. Elle stumbled once, pain flashing across her face, and Wyatt was there to steady her. No words, just the quick competence of people who understood that weakness acknowledged was strength preserved. The mining station appeared through the trees like a relic from another age. Weathered wood and rusted metal, half collapsed, but still defiant. A single building with broken windows and a roof that sagged but held. Wyatt did a quick patrol of the perimeter while Elle caught her breath, Stryker ranging ahead to clear the interior. Defensible, Wyatt announced. 2 exits, good sight lines, and enough cover to make them work for it. We set up here, let them come. They fortified quickly. Wyatt positioned ammunition and water at strategic points, cleared firing lanes, identified fallback positions. Elle checked her phone, surprised to find a single bar of signal. She composed a text to the only number she trusted. Agent Victoria Hayes' personal cell, saved from years ago when they'd talked about her mother's case. The message was simple. Margaret Brennan's daughter, have evidence of trafficking network. Juneau to Anchorage ports. Corrupt officers involved. Need immediate federal response. Coordinates attached. Officer in extreme danger. She hit send and watched the message struggle to transmit. 1 bar, then none. Then 1 again. Finally delivered. Done, she said. If Hayes gets that message, help is coming. We just have to survive until it arrives. Wyatt checked his watch. Pierce is maybe 30 minutes behind us. We hold this position, make them commit resources, then we slip out and hit the compound when they're focused here. And if they have more men than we think, then we get creative. Elle laughed, sharp and humorless. I've been creative for 4 months. Look where it got me. Still alive, Wyatt pointed out. That counts for something. They settled into position, weapons ready, Striker between them like a furry bridge. The wait was the hardest part. Always had been. The minutes when you knew violence was coming, but couldn't predict its shape or timing. When every sound might be threat and every silence might be strategy. Tell me about Cole, Elle said quietly. Not small talk. The request of someone who understood that shared stories made better soldiers. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, then spoke. Met him first day of SEAL training. He was smaller than most of us, had to work twice as hard to keep up. But he never quit, never even considered it. We went through deployment after deployment together. He saved my life in Kandahar, and I saved his in Helmand, and after a while it stopped being a debt and just became who we were, brothers. What happened? Ambush outside a village we thought was friendly. Sniper fire, RPGs, the whole mess. Cole took shrapnel to the chest covering our retreat. I carried him 3 miles to the extraction point, talking to him the whole time, telling him to stay awake, stay focused. He kept saying Sam's name, saying she was in trouble, that they'd taken her, that I had to promise to find her. Wyatt's voice cracked slightly. I promised. And then he died in my arms before the helicopter even touched down. Elle reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Brief, firm. The touch of someone who knew words couldn't fix some wounds, but presence could witness them. We find them all, she said. Cole's sister. My mother, if she's still alive. Every woman in those files. We burn this network to the ground. Together, Wyatt agreed. Stryker's growl was the only warning they got. Low and continuous, focused on the tree line to the east. Wyatt raised his rifle, sighting through the scope. Movement. 4 men armed and advancing in formation. Professional. Not cops playing soldier, but people with actual training. And behind them, directing from cover, Detective Randall Pierce. Contact, Wyatt said quietly. 4 hostiles, tactical gear, automatic weapons. Pierce is commanding from the rear. Elle chambered around, cold clarity settling over her. No warning shots. They came here to kill. Agreed. The first shot cracked the silence like thunder. Not from Wyatt's rifle, but from the approaching men, a burst that chewed through wood where Elle's head had been seconds before. She returned, fire-controlled 3-round bursts, driving them into cover. Wyatt sighted, breathed, squeezed. 1 hostile down, clean headshot. Chaos erupted. Gunfire from multiple directions, muzzle flashes in growing darkness, snow kicked up by impacts. Stryker barked, sharp and commanding, but held position. He'd learned in 3 tours that sometimes the best help was staying out of the crossfire. Wyatt moved between positions, never staying in one place long enough to draw concentrated fire. Elle covered angles he couldn't, her police training showing in the way she managed ammunition and chose targets. They worked together without planning it, instinct and experience creating a rhythm. Another hostile down, then a third wounded and dragging himself behind cover, but more were coming. Wyatt saw them through his scope, 2 vehicles worth of men, maybe 8 total. The math was simple and ugly. We're outnumbered, he said. Time to move. Back exit. Already compromised. They're flanking. Wyatt's mind raced through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. Then Stryker barked, insistent, and moved toward the northwest corner where boards had rotted through. He's found something, Elle said. Stryker, show me. The dog led them to a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a person, that opened into an old service tunnel. Mine access probably from when the station was operational. Dark and tight, but unguarded. Stryker's earned his retirement bonus, Wyatt said. They slipped through single-file, Stryker leading, moving fast through darkness while gunfire continued above. The tunnel emerged 100 yards away, hidden by overgrowth and snow. They ran. Not towards safety, but toward the compound, toward the answers that would make this worth surviving. Behind them, Pierce's men secured the empty mining station and realized too late they'd been chasing shadows. The compound crouched against the cliff face like something trying to hide in plain sight. Chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded 3 low buildings painted industrial gray, their walls streaked with rust and salt spray from the nearby inlet. Sodium lights cast pools of sickly yellow across packed snow, and security cameras perched under eaves like mechanical crows, watching for movement. A sign near the gate read, Bearing Straight Processing. Authorized personnel only. The letters faded from weather and neglect. Wyatt and Elle observed from a ridgeline 200 yards out, bellies pressed to frozen ground, breath fogging in the darkness. Stryker lay between them, absolutely still, except for his eyes tracking movement below. The compound looked quiet, almost abandoned, but Wyatt had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous places wore calm like camouflage. Guard count, Wyatt murmured, voice barely audible. Elle scanned methodically, cop training asserting itself. Two at the main gate, one patrolling the perimeter, another inside the central building visible through the window. That's four confirmed, likely more inside. Cameras. Six that I can see. Coverage is good but not perfect. Dead zone between the north fence and the freezer building. Elle pointed. If we approach from the water side, use that gap, we might make it to the loading bay unseen. Wyatt studied the approach, calculating angles and exposure times. Risky but feasible. His scope swept across the compound, cataloging details. The freezer truck idling near the loading dock, exhaust smoking in cold air. The fresh tire tracks leading to it, multiple vehicles recent. And the way the guards moved, professional and alert, suggested they were expecting something tonight. The Wednesday shipment, Elle said, following his gaze. It's happening now, which means Pierce might be here. And if he's here, he brought the men who were hunting us. Wyatt lowered the scope. We're walking into a hornet's nest. Good. Let all the hornets be in one place when we burn it down. Elle's voice carried the cold fury of someone who'd moved past fear into pure mission focus. She checked her phone, surprised to find 2 bars of signal this close to the ridge. Still no response from Hayes. Message might not have reached her, or she's mobilizing and can't reply. Wyatt considered their options, none of them good. We go in now, document what we can, and get out before they know we were there. No heroics. Elle met his eyes. If there are women in those containers, we can't extract them, not just the two of us against unknown numbers. Wyatt's voice was gentle but firm. We get proof, get out, and bring back people with authority and resources. That's how we save them. Elle's jaw tightened, but she nodded. The pragmatism hurt, accepting that sometimes the right choice felt like abandonment. But she'd seen enough operations go wrong to know that dead rescuers saved no one. They moved at full dark, using terrain and shadow to mask their approach. The inlet's frozen shore provided cover, jagged ice formations, rising like sculptures that caught and bent the compound's light into useless directions. Stryker ranged ahead, pausing at intervals to check their back trail, his training from 3 combat tours evident in every careful step. The fence was 8 feet of chain link topped with coiled razor wire. Wyatt produced wire cutters from his pack and worked the bottom edge, cutting a gap large enough to crawl through. Metal whispered against metal, sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness, but didn't carry past the wind's constant howl. They slipped through one at a time. Stryker went first, clearing the immediate area with nose and eyes, before signaling all clear with a single tail movement. Elle followed, then Wyatt, who carefully bent the cut section back into place. From a distance, it would pass casual inspection. The dead zone between fence and building was 30 feet of exposed ground. They crossed it in a low run, using a stack of pallets for cover before pressing against the freezer building's wall. Above them, a camera panned on its mount, sweeping right then left, predictable as clockwork. Wyatt timed its rhythm, counted seconds, and gestured. They moved during the gap, reaching the loading bay door as the camera completed its arc. The door was locked but not secured. Industrial padlock, heavy but standard. Wyatt pulled a tension wrench and pick from his vest, worked the mechanism with hands that remembered the feel from 100 midnight operations in places that didn't officially exist. 10 seconds. The lock clicked open. They slipped inside and sealed the door behind them. Cold hit like a wall, colder than outside, somehow the kind of manufactured chill designed to preserve things that would otherwise rot. Emergency lights provided dim red illumination, just enough to navigate by, but not enough to ruin night vision. The space was enormous, rows of pallets wrapped in plastic boxes, stenciled with innocuous labels. Medical supplies, perishable goods, frozen fish product. Elle moved to the nearest pallet, photographed the labeling with her phone, then used her knife to slice through plastic wrap. Inside were boxes, and inside the boxes were manifests. She scanned them quickly, her expression darkening with each line. These weights don't match the declared cargo, she whispered. Says medical equipment, but the tonnage is all wrong. And look at the routing. Juneau to Seattle to Portland, then international. But the fuel costs don't align with those distances. Wyatt examined another pallet. This one says frozen fish, but the preservation specifications are for human tissue transport. They photographed everything, working quickly and methodically. Each image was geotagged, time-stamped, irrefutable documentation of something that couldn't be explained away or was clerical error. Elle felt sick satisfaction building in her chest. This was enough. Combined with the files on her USB drive, this physical evidence would crack the operation wide open. Stryker's low growl froze them both. The dog had moved to an interior door, nose pressed to the crack, body rigid in alert posture. Wyatt crossed to him, pressed his ear to the door, and heard what Stryker had already identified. Voices, multiple speakers. One of them was Detective Randall Pierce. Elle's hand moved to her weapon, anger flashing hot and immediate. Wyatt touched her wrist, gentle but insistent. "Wait," the gesture said. "Listen first." The voices were muffled by the door but audible enough to follow. Pierce was speaking, his tone businesslike and clipped. "I don't care what it takes. Brennan has evidence that can't see daylight. Find her body or find her breathing, but find her tonight." Another voice, older and carrying authority. "Your people said she went off the cliff. Cars under 40 feet of water. She's dead, Randall. Stop being paranoid." "I trained her captain. She's resourceful and stubborn. Until I see a corpse, she's a threat." Pierce's footsteps paced, restless energy, audible in the rhythm. "What about the shipment?" The older voice, Captain Garrett Walshell, realized with sick certainty. The police chief, the man who'd given her commendations and called her a model officer, was standing on the other side of this door, discussing human trafficking like it was a logistics problem. "Trucks loaded," Walsh said. 12 units this time. Quality merchandise, young, minimal damage. Seattle buyers are paying premium. We clear 200,000 after expenses split 7 ways as agreed. And the federal heat, FBI in Anchorage has been asking questions, but nothing concrete. Agent Hayes especially. We might need to pressure her transfer again or find more permanent solutions. Elle's breath caught. They were talking about killing a federal agent. The scope of this operation was bigger than she'd imagined, deeper corruption, more carefully constructed. These weren't opportunistic criminals. This was organized, institutional, a machine that had been running smoothly for years. Wyatt touched her shoulder, gestured toward a stack of crates that would provide cover if they needed to move quickly. They repositioned Stryker, flowing silent as smoke between them. The voices continued discussing routes and payoffs and timelines with the casual efficiency of people conducting regular business. Then Pierce said something that made Elle's blood crystallize. "There's one more complication. The Brennan woman had files on the old cases too, including her mother." Margaret Walsh sounded surprised. "That was 17 years ago. Ancient history. Ancient history that proves pattern and practice. Margaret Brennan was DEA and smart enough to document everything before we put her on the boat. If Elle found her mother's files, if she connected the dots," Pierce's voice hardened. "We need to sanitize every location Margaret might have reached. That includes the holding facility." "You mean the island site?" Walsh asked. "The island site was decommissioned 8 years ago. Everything there should be bones and rust." But Pierce's tone suggested he wasn't certain. "Send a team to verify. If there's anything left that can tie back to us, burn it to ash." Elle's hands shook. The island site. Her mother might have been taken there, might have been held there, might have died there. The need to know, to find that place and see for herself, was physically painful. Wyatt read the agony on her face and shook his head fractionally. Later. They'd find it later. Right now, survival took priority over revelation. The voices moved away, a door opening and closing, leaving silence that felt heavier than sound. Wyatt counted to 60, then eased the door open an inch. Beyond lay a corridor, industrial and stark, leading deeper into the facility, empty for the moment. "We need to see what's in those containers," Elle whispered, "the ones Walsh called merchandise." Wyatt wanted to argue, wanted to pull her back toward the exit in safety, but he'd seen the files, knew what was at stake, and understood that some intelligence was worth the risk. He nodded once. They moved down the corridor, Stryker on point, using the dog's superior senses to detect threats before visual confirmation. The building's layout was simple, designed for function, not comfort. Offices to the left, storage to the right, and straight ahead, a heavy door marked cold storage, authorized access only. The door wasn't locked from the outside, designed for emergency egress. Wyatt eased it open, and frigid air rolled out, even colder than the warehouse. Beyond was a space the size of a basketball court lined with modified shipping containers, the kind used for refrigerated transport, temperature controlled, sealed against the elements, and occupied. Elle heard at first a sound that didn't belong to machinery or wind, a whimper, human and terrified, coming from the nearest container. She crossed to it, found the locking mechanism, and looked at Wyatt with the question in her eyes. He checked the corridor, saw no movement, and nodded. Elle opened the container. 12 women huddled inside, ages ranging from late teens to mid-30s, wrapped in thin blankets insufficient against the cold. They blinked against even the dim emergency lighting, eyes adjusting from darkness. Their wrists bore marks from restraints, their faces were hollow with hunger and fear, and when they saw Elle's uniform, hope and terror warred in their expressions. Federal help is coming, Elle said softly, her badge visible in the dim light. You're safe now. We won't let them hurt you anymore. One woman, braver or more desperate than the rest, spoke with a Russian accent. They said police were bringing us to safety. Then they locked us here. You are not with them. No, Elle said fiercely. I'm here to stop them. She photographed the interior, documenting conditions and faces, each image another nail in the conspiracy's coffin. Wyatt moved along the wall, checking the other containers. Most were empty, waiting for future cargo. But in the furthest container, sealed separately from the others, he found something that stopped his heart. A single woman older than the others, early 50s, with gray-streaked auburn hair and a scar on her wrist shaped like a C. She was unconscious, breathing shallow medical equipment, rigged to keep her sedated but stable. A prisoner, but also leveraged, kept alive for reasons Wyatt could only guess. He knew before Elle reached him, knew from the way she went rigid, from the sound that escaped her throat, half sob and half roar. Mom, Elle breathed. Oh God, Mom. Margaret Brennan stirred at her daughter's voice, eyelids fluttering but not opening. Elle dropped to her knees, hands hovering over her mother's face, afraid to touch, afraid she might shatter like ice. 17 years. 17 years of not knowing, of hoping and grieving in equal measure. And here was the answer, lying in a shipping container, kept barely alive by machines. We have to move her, Wyatt said gently. We have to move all of them. How? Elle's voice cracked. We can't fight our way out with 12 civilians and a woman who can barely breathe. We'd be slaughtered. Then we call in the cavalry. Wyatt pulled out his satellite phone, the emergency backup he'd brought for worst-case scenarios. We get Hayes on the line, we tell her exactly where we are, and we hold this position until federal agents arrive. They'll know we're here the moment we open these doors to evacuate. Then we don't evacuate. We fortify. Wyatt's mind shifted into tactical mode, the part of him that had planned operations in hostile territory where failure meant body bags. We lock down this cold storage, use the containers as defensive positions. The women stay safe inside, we control the single access point, and we make Pierce come to us through a fatal funnel. Elle looked at the women, at her mother, at the impossible choice between safety and justice. Then she looked at Stryker, who sat calmly between her and Wyatt, amber eyes intelligent and certain. Do it, she said. Make the call. Wyatt dialed the number Elle had memorized from years ago, hoping it still worked, hoping Agent Victoria Hayes answered. The satellite connection was clean and clear, expensive technology doing what cheap cell service couldn't. It rang twice. Hayes. The voice was crisp, female, and deeply suspicious of unknown numbers. Agent Hayes, this is Lieutenant Wyatt Callahan, retired Navy SEAL. I'm with Officer Eliza Brennan of the Juneau Police Department. We have a federal emergency. A pause. Brennan, Margaret Brennan's daughter. Yes, ma'am. We're inside the Bering Strait Processing Facility, Northeast Inlet, coordinates to follow. We have 12 trafficking victims in custody, including Margaret Brennan herself. We have photographic evidence of a network involving at least 7 corrupt officers, including Captain Garrett Walsh and Detective Randall Pierce. And we are about to be engaged by hostiles who will kill everyone here if they reach us. Hayes' professionalism was absolute. How many hostiles? Unknown, at least 10, possibly more. Mixed security and corrupted law enforcement. Can you hold position? We can hold, Wyatt said with more confidence than he felt. But we need federal response, and we need it fast. Nearest FBI tactical team is 40 minutes out. I'm mobilizing now, will be on site in 90 minutes with full support. Hayes' voice hardened. Lieutenant, I'm giving you authorization under federal emergency statutes. Protect those victims by any means necessary. Deadly force is authorized. Understood. Sending GPS coordinates now. He hung up and looked at Elle. Help is coming. We hold for 40 minutes. Before Elle could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Brennan, I know you're inside. I'm the one who helped your mother hide the original DEA files 17 years ago. They're in a safety deposit box, Bank of Juneau Box 847. Key is behind the circuit breaker in Margaret's old apartment. This will bury them all. Agent Reed retired. Elle stared at the message, heart pounding. Wyatt, look at this, he read quickly. Could be a trap, or could be the final piece we need. Margaret mentioned an Agent Reed once when I was a kid, said he was the only one who believed her. Elle screenshot the message. If those files exist, they prove the network's been running for decades. This goes deeper than we thought. The realization hit them both. They weren't just fighting Pierce and Walsh. They were fighting a system that had protected itself for a generation. We get out of here alive, Wyatt said quietly. We find that box. And we burn the whole thing down, Elle finished. Elle nodded, then turned to the women. She spoke clearly, projecting calm she didn't entirely feel. Listen carefully. Federal agents are coming to extract you, but it will take time. We need you to stay into the containers, stay quiet and stay low. If shooting starts, you lie flat and you do not move until someone in an FBI vest tells you it's safe. Do you understand? The women nodded, fear bright in their eyes, but also hope, the first real hope some of them had felt in months. Elle helped them back into the container, made sure they had blankets and water from her pack and sealed them inside. Her mother remained in the separate container, still sedated, still barely breathing. Elle knelt beside her for 10 seconds, pressed a kiss to her mother's forehead, and whispered, "I found you. I'm not letting go." Then she stood, wiped her eyes, and became the officer Pierce had trained her to be. They fortified the cold storage room with brutal efficiency. Wyatt moved pallets to create firing positions with overlapping fields of fire. Elle checked the ammunition they had left, redistributed it for maximum effectiveness, and set up a fallback position deeper in the room. Stryker positioned himself at the choke point, the single door through which any attack must come, and settled into the patient alertness of a guardian who would not be moved. They didn't have to wait long. Footsteps in the corridor, multiple people moving with purpose. Then Pierce's voice, loud enough to carry through the door. "Brennan, I know you're in there. I saw your tracks in the snow, saw where you cut the fence. You're trapped." Elle said nothing. Silence was often the strongest response. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Pierce continued. "You've already won. Federal agents are probably on their way. My career is over. Walsh will roll on everyone to save himself. But those women in there, they're just cargo. They don't matter to you. Let them go and walk away. You find your mother, you get your justice, and nobody else has to die tonight." Wyatt touched Elle's arm, shook his head. "Don't engage." But Elle stepped closer to the door, voice carrying cold and clear. "I'm not negotiating with a man who murdered my mother and spent 17 years pretending to be my friend." "I didn't murder her," Pierce said. "Margaret's alive, sedated, sick, but alive. I kept her that way as insurance. Proof I could bring her back if needed. You want her to survive this, you cooperate. You kept her in a box for 17 years. Elle's voice shook with fury. "You stole her life, my childhood, and the truth. You taught me about honor while you sold human beings like furniture. There's no deal, Randall. There's only prison or a grave, and right now I don't care which." A long silence. Then Pierce's tone shifted, became colder and more businesslike. "Then you've made your choice. I'm sorry it had to end this way, Elle. You were a good cop, but you forgot the most important lesson. Sometimes the machine wins." Footsteps retreated. Wyatt recognized the sound of men taking positions, preparing for assault. He counted at least 6 voices, possibly 8. The math was bad and getting worse. "They'll try to burn us out or gas us," he said. "Standard entry tactics for barricaded suspects. Cold storage is sealed against outside air. Fire won't spread easily and gas takes time to penetrate." Elle checked her weapon chambered around. "They'll have to breach and clear, which puts them in a fatal funnel through that single door. We have advantage of position. Until they bring explosives or call in more men." Elle looked at Stryker. "He should stay back away from the shooting." "He won't," Wyatt said simply. "And I'm not going to order him to abandon us. He's made his choice." The first attempt came 5 minutes later. Flashbang grenade through the door, deafening blast and blinding light designed to disorient defenders. But Wyatt and Elle had positioned behind the shipping containers, distance and angle protecting them from the worst effects. When the first man charged through the door, rifle raised, Elle put 2 rounds center mass. He went down hard. The second man dragged the first back, return fire spraying the container walls with sparks. Wyatt returned fire methodically, forcing them back into the corridor. The door slammed shut again. "One down, maybe wounded, maybe dead," Wyatt reported. "They'll reassess now." The next attempt was more sophisticated. 2 men with ballistic shields advancing in formation, covering each other, while a third provided suppressing fire. Wyatt targeted the shooter, driving him to cover, while Elle aimed for legs beneath the shields. Modern warfare had taught soldiers to armor the torso, but legs remained vulnerable. Her third shot connected, shattering someone's knee. The man screamed, the shield wall collapsed, and Wyatt put rounds through the gap. 2 more down, but ammunition was finite, and Pierce had numbers on his side. Stryker barked, sharp and urgent, attention fixed on the back wall. Wyatt saw it at the same moment, fine dust drifting down from a section of corrugated metal. They were cutting through, creating a second entry point. "They're flanking," Wyatt said. He repositioned to cover the new threat while Elle held the door. The shipping containers that had been defensive positions were now dividing their attention, forcing them to cover multiple angles. The metal shrieked as a section was pulled away and two men pushed through the gap, moving fast. Wyatt dropped one with a headshot, but the second reached cover and returned fire. Rounds punched through plastic and metal, searching for flesh. L pivoted, acquired the target, fired. The hostile jerked and fell. But now Pierce knew their positions, knew how many shooters were defending, and could coordinate accordingly. The door burst open again, three men this time, using overwhelming firepower to pin the defenders. Wyatt and L returned fire, the cold storage room becoming a deafening chaos of muzzle flashes and ricochets and the acrid stink of cordite. Stryker lunged. The German Shepherd had been waiting, analyzing, and when one hostile's attention shifted to reload, the dog attacked. 80 pounds of trained aggression hit the man's gun, arm jaws clamping down with force that shattered bone. The man screamed, weapon clattering away, and his partners turned their fire toward the dog. "Stryker down!" Wyatt roared. But the dog had already committed, already understood the tactical necessity of disruption, even at personal cost. Rounds tore through the space where he'd been won, grazing his shoulder, drawing blood dark against tan fur. Stryker released, dropped, rolled behind cover with the learned reflexes of 3 combat tours. The momentary distraction was enough. L shot the man Stryker had savaged. Wyatt dropped another, and the third retreated through the door, dragging a wounded comrade. Silence fell like a hammer. Wyatt crossed to Stryker, hands running over the dog's body, checking for serious injury. The shoulder wound was a graze, painful but not fatal. He applied pressure, whispered thanks into fur that smelled like snow and gunpowder. "How much ammunition left?" L asked, voice tight. 2 magazines, maybe 40 rounds. Wyatt met her eyes. "Utah, about the same. Not enough for a prolonged siege." They both knew it. But before Pierce could organize another assault, new sounds cut through the night. Rotors beating air. Multiple helicopters approaching fast, their searchlights sweeping the compound like dawn arriving early. And beneath that, the distinctive wail of sirens, lots of them converging from multiple directions. Victoria Hayes had brought everything. Through the door they heard chaos, shouting, confusion, someone yelling about federal agents. Pierce's voice cut through sharp with command. "Fall back, scatter, destroy evidence. Move!" Wyatt kept his weapon trained on the door, expecting one final desperate assault. But the footsteps retreated instead, panic overriding tactical discipline. The machinery of conspiracy, so smoothly running minutes before, was tearing itself apart. The door burst open, but this time it was FBI tactical agents in full gear, rifles, raised voices, commanding. "Federal agents, show your hands." Wyatt and L complied immediately, weapons on the ground, hands visible, moving slow and clear. "Officer Eliza Brennan, Juneau PD," L called. "We have 12 civilian hostages in the shipping containers. One requires immediate medical attention." The agents flowed in, securing the room with professional efficiency. And behind them came Victoria Hayes, her gray hair pulled back, severe eyes taking in the scene with the sharpness of someone who'd spent a career walking into aftermath. She looked at Elle, and something like vindication crossed her face. "Officer Brennan, you look like hell." "Ma'am," Elle swayed slightly, adrenaline crash beginning. "My mother is here, Container 3. She needs medical help now." Hayes signaled paramedics forward, then approached Elle. 17 years I've been waiting for evidence solid enough to break this open. You just handed me a case that will destroy careers and flip a network that's been operating since before you were born." She extended her hand. "Your mother would be proud." Elle shook it, then her knees buckled. Wyatt caught her steady and unhurried. "She's hypothermic recovery, bruised ribs, and running on pure spite for the last 6 hours." "Get her medical attention," Hayes ordered. Then she looked at Wyatt. "And you are, Wayne, just someone who was in the right place at the right time." Hayes studied him, the rifle, the professional way he'd positioned equipment. "Navy SEAL, retired. Your timing was fortunate." "Not fortune," Wyatt said. He looked at Stryker, who sat despite his wound head high. "Credit goes to him." Hayes crouched, met the dog's amber eyes, and nodded with respect. "I'll make sure the paperwork mentions his service." The extraction took 2 hours. Paramedics treated the 12 women, loading them into ambulances for transport to Juneau Medical Center. Margaret Brennan required intensive care, her sedation carefully reversed under medical supervision. When she opened her eyes and saw her daughter's face, the sound she made wasn't quite a word, but carried 17 years of love and loss and the impossible miracle of reunion. Elle held her mother's hand in the ambulance, refusing to let go even when the paramedics needed space to work. "I never stopped looking," she whispered. "Never." Margaret's voice was rough from disuse but clear. I knew you'd come." The compound became a crime scene, federal agents cataloging evidence while spotlights turned night into artificial day. Pierce and Walsh were arrested trying to flee their vehicles intercepted by roadblocks. 7 other officers were taken into custody before dawn, caught by bank records and communications logs that L's USB drive had already mapped. By the time the sun rose over Alaska, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, the machinery of justice was moving with the inevitability of avalanche. The trial took 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming, saying the witnesses credible, the documentation irrefutable. Detective Randall Pierce received 25 years for murder, kidnapping, and racketeering. Captain Garrett Walsh received 30 years for organizing a criminal enterprise. 17 other officers received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years, their careers and reputations destroyed by choices they'd made when they thought no one was watching. The women testified, each voice adding weight to accusations that couldn't be denied or bargained away. Some were reunited with families who'd given up hope. Others started over with new identities and federal assistance, building lives from wreckage. All of them knew that 2 people and a bond had stood between them and disappearance. Margaret Brennan recovered slowly but completely, her mind sharp even when her body needed help remembering how to walk without assistance. She testified at Pierce's trial, describing 17 years held in captivity as leverage against future investigations, kept barely alive by people who viewed her as property. The jury wept. The judge's sentencing was severe. Elle and Wyatt spent 3 months helping Hayes build the federal case, cross-referencing evidence and tracking down leads. The safety deposit box was real Agent Reed's final act of conscience before cancer took him. The files inside documented 30 years of corruption, leading to 6 more arrests, including a retired senator and 2 federal prosecutors who'd been on the trafficking network's payroll since the 1990s. The island site yielded 14 bodies buried in a mass grave. Forensics matched 3 to missing DEA agents. Margaret's testimony about her time there, the month she'd spent believing she would die on that frozen rock before being moved to the compound, as leverage filled in gaps that had haunted investigators for decades. 9 months after that night in the cold storage facility, Elle stood on a mountain ridge overlooking a valley where snow was just beginning to melt. Spring was coming to Alaska reluctantly, winter refusing to release its grip without a fight. Beside her stood Wyatt, scanning terrain with the relaxed alertness of someone always partially on mission. And between them, Stryker ranged ahead, nose to ground, tracking an ascent only he could identify. They were investigating a tip about a remote cabin used as a way station for trafficking routes. The cabin proved empty, abandoned months before, but the location itself was valuable intelligence. Elle photographed everything while Wyatt mapped GPS coordinates for the federal database. "How many does this make?" Wyatt asked. 14 locations cleared, 6 active sites shut down, 23 people arrested. Elle lowered her camera. 41 women and children recovered. And that's just in 9 months. "And Samantha?" Elle asked quietly. Wyatt's expression softened. "Found her 3 months ago. She was in a Seattle rehabilitation facility, kept sedated like your mother. She's recovering now. Slowly, but she's fighting." He looked out at the mountains. "I visit her every 2 weeks. She doesn't remember much, but she knows Cole tried to save her. That gives her something to hold on to." And the island site. Hayes sent a team. Found our remains of 14 women buried in a mass grave. Forensics matched 3 to missing DEA agents from the 90s and early 2000s. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Your mother's files led to 6 more arrests, including a retired senator. The network went back 30 years. Elle nodded slowly, the weight of generations of corruption settling over her. 30 years of silence. "But it's over now." "It's over," Wyatt agreed. They hiked back to the helicopter, waiting in a clearing, Stryker leading the way with the confidence of a dog who knew his purpose. Inside, Victoria Hayes reviewed their findings via satellite uplink, already coordinating the next operation. The work never stopped. There were always more locations, more perpetrators, more victims who needed finding. But as the helicopter lifted off and Alaska spread beneath them in vast white silence, Elle felt something she hadn't felt since she was 16. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the acceptance that struggle could have meaning, that searching for truth wasn't futile, even when the truth hurt, that the silence of disappearance could be broken by people who refused to look away. She looked at Wyatt, who was cleaning his rifle with the meditative focus of ritual. She looked at Stryker, who dozed with his head on his paws, content in the way working dogs are content when the work is good. And she looked at her reflection in the helicopter window, seeing her mother's eyes looking back, fierce and alive, and refusing to quit. The radio crackled. Hayes's voice, crisp and urgent. "We've got a hit on the database. 3 women missing from a fishing town in Oregon. Communications suggest connection to the network. How fast can you be wheels down in Portland? L met Wyatt's eyes. He nodded once, already reaching for his gear. Stryker lifted his head, ears pricked, reading the shift in energy. 2 hours, L replied. We're on our way. The helicopter banked south, leaving Alaska's frozen beauty behind, but carrying forward the lessons learned in ice and darkness. That some people would always choose profit over compassion, but others would always choose to fight back. That justice might freeze, but it never died. And that sometimes the machine didn't win. Sometimes stubborn people with good dogs and better principles could throw sand in the gears and watch the whole system grind to halt. Margaret Brennan watched the news coverage from her rehabilitation center, seeing her daughter's face as Elle led victims from a warehouse in Portland. She smiled, touched the photograph of her younger self in uniform, and whispered to a ghost only she could see. She finished it, love. Our girl finished what we started. In Juneau, the academy trained new recruits differently now. They learned about Officer Eliza Brennan, who chose truth over convenience and survived the choice. They learned about the importance of questioning authority, about watching for patterns others ignored, about the courage it took to stand alone when everyone else looked away. In a cabin in the Alaska wilderness, empty now, but maintained by someone who visited monthly to make sure pipes didn't freeze, a photograph sat on the mantel. Wyatt and Elle and Stryker, taken by Hayes after their first successful joint operation. 3 faces, human and canine, showing the particular satisfaction that comes from hard work done well. The cabin would wait patient as stone for the day when they came back to rest. But that day wasn't today, and probably wouldn't be tomorrow. The work called, the mission continued. And somewhere in the darkness where predators hid and victims disappeared, 3 shadows moved with purpose and precision, hunting the hunters, finding the lost, proving that sometimes the frozen silence could be broken by a bark in the storm, and people brave enough to answer. The helicopter disappeared into morning light, carrying them toward the next fight, the next truth, the next person who needed someone to refuse to look away. Behind them, Alaska's mountains stood eternal and indifferent witnesses to the small, fierce dramas of human choice, remembering everything and judging nothing. But in the hearts of those who'd survived the ice and the darkness and the betrayal, something had changed fundamentally and forever. Fear had been replaced by purpose. Silence had been replaced by testimony. And the question that had haunted Elle since she was 16, the question about her mother's disappearance and what it meant to fight for truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies, had finally been answered. Justice might freeze, but it never died. And sometimes, against all odds and expectations, against the machine's grinding certainty of victory, 3 souls and 1 dog were enough to tip the scales. The end was also a beginning. The frozen badge had thawed, and the woman who wore it was just getting started.